Hello and welcome to my Specialization Introduction and Outdoor Content Guide for the Blood Death Knight Specialization in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you haven't watched the video primer for this series, please go do so now. There's going to be a link in the description below. That video will explain why we're doing the things that we're doing in these videos. That one video will apply to all 36 specialization videos, so you only have to watch it once. It saves you time, saves me time, and keeps the length of these videos down. So, go do that now if you haven't seen it before. Now, before we get started, this is a tank specialization guide, and I want to make it clear that this is not a guide on how to tank in dungeons or raids or anything like that. This is a guide to how to play as the Blood Death Knight specialization in open world content, assuming that you are solo, you're by yourself, maybe there's a friend or two with you, but you're not actually tanking really. You're trying to get quests and leveling and things like that done. So we are going to be focused a lot on increasing our damage potential and things like that because we have a lot of natural survivability as a tank, and that's going to sacrifice some of the abilities that might be better for tanking in a dungeon or raid. So keep that in mind as we're doing this guide. Okay, now we are in game. We've got our action bars set up and clear. We go into our talent tree. These are the talents you can select to fulfill the requirements laid out in the primer video. And now that we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and jump into our spell book and get our spells organized. Now, I'm not going to be going in detail on every single one of these spells. I'll give you a brief description of what the spell does so you can understand why it's being placed into the category that it's being put into. Let's kick things off. Anti-Magic Shell. This is a damage reduction ability for magic damage on a 1 minute cooldown, so that goes in our defensive cooldown section. We have Asphyxiate. This is a 5-second stun on a cooldown that goes in our crowd control or CC section. Blood Boil is part of our core rotation. Control Undead allows us to control an undead target, but we won't always be able to use it because sometimes we'll be in an area where there are no undead, or even if we can, we're going to set this up usually outside of combat. So we're going to put that in our miscellaneous spells section over here, just to remember that we have it and use it when we have the opportunity. Dancing Rune Weapon is a offensive cooldown ability. That summons a rune weapon that's going to mirror the attacks and things that we do, as well as give us increased parry chance, which is kind of a defensive ability, but we're going to be using it as an offensive ability out in open world content. Dark Command is our taunt. Obviously, that's something we're going to use a lot in dungeons and raids, but out in open world content, we're really not going to use it all that often. So we're going to put it in our combat utility section over here on the right with the stuff that we want to remember that we have, but we're probably not going to be using very often. The one caveat I will add to this is that if you are fighting against a rare mob or an elite, then obviously you want to be the person trying to tank that creature, but generally you won't have too much trouble maintaining enough threat to keep that creature focused on you just by using your normal abilities. But if you need to, you'll have that taunt right there so that you can cast that if you need to make sure that you maintain control of that enemy. Next we have Death and Decay. That's part of our core rotation. Then we have Death Gate. That takes us back to Ebb and Hold, the base of the Death Knights. That's something we're going to use out of combat, so we put it in our miscellaneous area here. We have Death Grip. That is a combat utility ability. It pulls an enemy in towards us, so that's going to go in our combat utility section. Death Strike is part of our core rotation. Death's Advance is a movement ability with a longer cooldown, but I always put those abilities into the combat utility section because you're going to want to remember to use those as often as possible to help you get from place to place. Death's Caress. That is a combat utility ability. Essentially what this is it will allow us to pull a target to us or attack a target from a distance. We won't use it in our core rotation, but it's there to help us get enemies to come to us because as a Death Knight, we don't have a lot of mobility. Gorfiend's Grasp. This is a combat utility on a long cooldown. It's essentially Death Grip, but you pick a target and you cast Gorfine's Grasp, and all targets within 15 yards of that target will get sucked into that one target. And then so you have a bunch of people clumped up together, and you could do a lot of AoE damage. So that is a combat utility ability that we're going to want to use when we can to group up enemies and deal that AoE damage. Heart Strike is part of our core rotation. Icebound Fortitude is damage reduction and stun immunity. That goes in our defensive cooldowns. Marrow Rend is part of our core rotation. Mind Freeze is an interrupt that goes in our crowd control section. Path of Frost allows us to run or walk on top of water, whether we're mounted or not, but it is removed by combat damage. So usually you're going to be using this outside of combat to travel place to place, and so we're going to put that with our miscellaneous spells over here. Raise Ally is an ability that we probably won't use much in the open world, but we'll keep it over here just in case we do happen to use it. It's a battle res. It will let you resurrect someone while you're in combat, so probably not going to use it very often, but, you know, we may have occasion for it, so we'll keep it over here. And then we have Rune Forging. This is something we do back at Ebb and Hold in front of a Rune Forge. It allows us to put enchantments onto our weapons so we can get some nice passive ability from them. So we're going to put that over here with our miscellaneous spells. Then we have Vampiric Blood. This will increase our maximum health and healing and absorbs that we receive. So it is a defensive cooldown. And that covers all of the active abilities that we have as a Blood Death Knight. Now we will go ahead and touch on the passives that the Blood Death Knight does have. So we have Veteran of the Third War. This increases our stamina and armor. Doesn't affect our gameplay. On a Pale Horse, we get 20% extra mounted speed. Also doesn't affect our gameplay. And then we'll come back to these other two here after we've looked at the core rotation. Now, we need to go over the resources that a Blood Death Knight has available to them. The Blood Death Knight has two resources. You have your Blood Runes. You start combat with 6 of them, and you will spend them on abilities. As you do that, you will generate your second resource, which is called Runic Power. Runic Power, you start with 0, and you can have, I believe, let me double check here. Okay, so for the Death Knight, you can have 115 as your maximum. So what will happen is you will spend runes on abilities, and as you do that, you will gain Runic Power. You'll then spend your Runic Power on other abilities to deal more damage or tank and generate threat. Your runes will regenerate automatically after they are spent as well. So now that we know how the resources work, let's take a look at what the core rotation of the Blood Death Knight and open world content is going to be. So you're going to open combat with Blood Boil. Blood Boil does a little bit of damage, infects all enemies within 10 yards with Blood Plague. Blood Plague is a damage over time debuff that lasts for 24 seconds. Okay? And Blood Boil has 2 charges, and these will regenerate. After you cast Blood Boil, which is free, you're going to want to use Marrow Rend. Now, Marrow Rend costs 2 runes. It deals damage to a single target, and it gives you 3 charges of Bone Shield. These are not stacks, they're charges, and there is a difference there. While you have Bone Shield active, you gain a barrier of whirling bones around you. They increase your armor by a certain amount, and your haste by 10%. So, what happens, the reason you get charges and not stacks is because as you get more stacks, you don't get more haste and things like that. Instead, you get these charges because every time you get hit by a melee attack, one of your charges will go away. So you build up these charges, you get this Bone Shield, and as you get hit, those charges go down, and you bring them back up. If you ever get to 0, you lose the Bone Shield. As long as you have at least 1 stack of, or 1 charge of Bone Shield, you keep that buff. So the Bone Shields will last 30 seconds or until they all get consumed. So, you cast your Blood Boil, you start spending on Marrow Rend, Your Bone Shield, you can have a maximum of 10 charges. So you always want to have some charges. How many you want to get to is going to differ depending on how tough you think the enemy is. If you think that it's something you're going to kill pretty quickly, you can just use Marrow Rend once or twice to get yourself, 3 or 6 charges. If you're fighting a tougher elite enemy, then you can get up to the maximum 10 charges. And then at that point, if you're wanting to spend your blood runes, you're going to want to start using Heartstrike. Heartstrike costs 1 rune. It does a good amount of damage and reduces your target's movement. But the key with Heartstrike is that it generates 5 bonus runic power. So this is what you use after you've got your stacks of Bone Shield, or your charges of Bone Shield. I'm going to mix that up, but charges. After you've got your charges of Bone Shield up, you switch over to Heartstrike to spend your runes to generate a lot more runic power. Then you spend your runic power on Deathstrike. Deathstrike costs 45 runic power. It does a really nice chunk of damage and will heal you for damage as well. So that's what you'll spend your runic power on. Now, along with this, we do have Death and Decay. This costs 1 rune. It puts a little AoE field down, and it will deal damage over time to the enemies that are standing in it. And also, while you're in it, your Heartstrike will hit up to 3 additional targets. So, standing inside of your Death and Decay makes your Heartstrike an AoE ability. So you'll get even more runic power from that. So let's go down and take a look at how this is going to work. So we're going to come down to our enemy here, and we're going to cast our Blood Boil. And you can see that hits our target and targets near it, and they now have this Blood Plague debuff. Deals damage every 3 seconds. Okay, so we cast that, and then we're going to start using our Marrow Rend. And you can see we've got our 3 stacks of Bone Shield. We've got our whirling bones around us. Okay. And if we get up to our maximum of 10 here, we've got 10 stacks. They're not going to go anywhere because these target dummies won't hit us. But now we would start using our Heartstrike, and that's going to generate a good chunk of runic power. And then we can spin that on our Death Strikes. So we go back, start spinning our Heart Runes again, doing our Heartstrikes to spin our runes again, and then cast Deathstrike. Now, along with this, like I said, we can put out our Death and Decay, and then that's going to cause our Heartstrike to hit both targets, if we're close enough to them. There we go. So, what we want to do is follow that rotation. We want to make sure that we always have Blood Plague on our targets. We want to try to stay at least 1 stack. It's pretty easy to stay at more than 1, but we want to have some stacks or charges of Bone Shield so we get that 10% haste, really. The armor helps too, but for the purposes of killing things, we want that haste. Then we'll start using our Heart Strikes to generate runic power and dump all that into our Death Strikes. So, you're probably wondering what these graphics are here. Now that we've covered how the basic rotation works, we're going to look at our 2 other passive abilities for the Blood Death Knight. So we have Crimson Scourge. Your auto attacks on targets infected with your Blood Plague, which is our ability we're casting here, have a chance to make your next Death and Decay cost no runes and reset its cooldown. So essentially what this means is that we can hold off on casting Death and Decay and wait until we get a proc for Crimson Scourge. So we'll put up our Blood Plague, we'll start hitting people, we'll get our stacks up of Marrow Rend, and somewhere in that time period, we're probably going to get a proc of this, which will allow us to cast Death and Decay for free. And that also means if we get that proc again, we can cast it again for free, regardless of what the cooldown was. So, that's why we include this in our core rotation, is because oftentimes we're going to be able to cast this completely for free, and also because we have limited AoE damage that we can deal, so being able to stand in that and have our Heart Strike hit a bunch of enemies helps out quite a bit. Also, we have Blood Shield. Oh, and when we get that Crimson Scourge proc, you are going to see those red kind of blood bubbles pop up on the side of your character. So we also have Mastery Blood Shield. Each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, which we're spending our Runic Power on, you gain 49.5% or whatever your Mastery is giving you of the base amount healed as a physical damage absorption shield. This also just increases our attack power as well, so we can actually kill things. So we'll go down one more time and we will take a look at that proc that we're going to get from Crimson Scourge. So we go up and we cast our Blood Boil. We start auto-attacking, and we're just going to wait until we get a proc. So let's say we're building up our Marrow Rend charges, and then there we go. We got our Death and Decay. Still building up our Marrow Rend charges. Spend some Runic Power on Death Strike. If you got nothing to do, you can always recast Blood Boil if you want to. Alright, in that case, we're not... There we go. We got another proc right there. Crimson Scourge for our free Death and Decay. Alright, and that's how the core rotation, the core abilities of the Blood Death Knight work. Now we're going to jump into our talents. And we're going to create a build that's going to work well in open world content. I'll get that set up here. Okay, so this is the build that I recommend that you use in outdoor content. It's definitely not the only one you could use, but it's the one that I enjoy and I find fun. And remember, once again, our goal here is to increase our damage output, maybe some of our mobility and things like that, so that we can kill stuff faster, because as a tank specialization, we're probably not going to die. And the Blood Death Knight does have a lot of self-healing, so they're kind of the champions of, you know, not having to worry about taking a lot of damage. So we're going to go through and we're going to check out each of the talents and cover why they're part of the build. Blood Drinker costs 1 rune, has a 30-yard range, and a 30-second cooldown. It drains a lot of health from the target over 2.7 seconds. You can still move, parry, dodge, and use defensive abilities while channeling this ability. So this is in here because if we look, so our Marrow Rend deals 727 physical damage. Our Heart Strike deals 469 physical damage. Right? These are pretty low numbers. Our Death Strike, which we have to build up to and spend a lot of runic power on, deals 1,618 physical damage, according to these numbers. Blood Drinker, with a 30-second cooldown in 2.7 seconds, deals 3,424 damage. This ability, with the cooldown and the range, gives us the ability to deal a lot of damage to a single target. So hitting this button when you're going to fight an elite or a rare mob helps you deal a significant portion of their health and damage while you're trying to get your other stuff going. So this is here as another offensive ability that we can use, and we could just throw that in here in our as part of our core rotation and know that we basically want to use it every time it's off cooldown on any sort of enemy that's going to have even a little, you know, larger than normal health pool that we want to get through. Next, we have Rapid Decomposition. Your Blood Plague and Death and Decay deal damage 15% more often. This is great because it means that as we're putting that Blood Plague onto our enemies, or as they're standing in our Death and Decay, we're dealing more damage. And that's what we want. We want more damage. We want to kill things faster. Next, we have Ossuary. While you have at least 5 Bone Shield charges, the cost of Death Strike is reduced by 5 Runic Power. Additionally, your maximum Runic Power is increased by 10. So this is nice because we should pretty easily get to above 5 Bone Shield charges. And this is going to mean we can cast our Death Strike for 40 Runic Power instead of 45. It also allows us to build up to 125 Runic Power, and this will allow us to essentially be able to cast 2 or 3 Bone Strikes without having to worry about regenerating extra Runic Power in order to cast more of that ability. Next, we have Will of the Necropolis. Honestly, on this 60 tier, you can kind of take whatever you want. I chose Will of the Necropolis because it's totally passive. If for some reason we get below 35% health, any damage we take will be reduced by 35%. So in the situations where we are getting low, we'll be able to take even less damage. Our other options here, Anti-Magic Barrier. This reduces the cooldown of our Anti-Magic Shell and increases the amount absorbed by 30%. However, you can still just use Anti-Magic Barrier when you need to and have the damage reduction below 35% health as well. Also, we have Rune Tap. It costs 1 rune and reduces all damage taken by 30% for 4 seconds. Chances are you're going to want to hit this when your health's already low, so instead of doing that, we can just take Will of the Necropolis, where anytime we're pretty low, we just get a flat 35% damage reduction. So you can take whatever you like here, but I personally like Will of the Necropolis on this tier. Next up on the 75 tier, we're taking Wraith Walk. This is a 1 minute. We're going to put this in our combat utility. It's a 1 minute movement speed buff. It gives a 70% increased movement for 4 seconds. That might not seem like a lot, but on a Death Knight, that is huge. Because we do not have a lot of ways to increase our mobility. So if you're inside of a cave or anything like that, being able to just hit Wraith Walk every single time it's off cooldown and get 4 seconds of 70% increased movement speed, it doesn't seem like a lot, but you're like, oh, thank goodness that it's there. So we're picking that up just purely for the ability to travel around faster. Next up on 90, we're picking Bloodworms. The reason for this is our other 2 abilities here are super defensive, and Bloodworms is as well. But if we look at Voracious, Death Strike grants you Leech. Okay, so we cast Death Strike and we get to heal. Or Mark of Blood puts a Mark of Blood on an enemy target, and basically whatever their auto attack damage is, it heals their victim as well. So it's the same, more healing. We're picking Bloodworms because it gives our auto attacks a chance to summon a Bloodworm. And Bloodworms deal minor damage to your target for 15 seconds and then burst, healing you for 15% of your missing health. So minor damage from Bloodworms is better than no damage from the other 2 abilities. So that's why we're taking Bloodworms. Just because we probably don't need the healing from any of these talents in open world content, so we'll take every little incremental damage increase that we can get. Finally, on the 100 tier, we're taking Bone Storm. So this is a 1 minute cooldown ability, so it will go into our offensive cooldowns. It takes 10 to 100 Runic Power, and it creates a whirl of bone and gore that deals damage to nearby enemies every second and heals you for 3% of your maximum health every time it deals damage. You get 1 second of Bone Storm for every 10 Runic Power you spend. So this is also where having our increased Runic Power will come into play, because we can build up to over 100, cast Bone Storm, and now we've got this ability that at 10 seconds is going to be doing 3,000 damage to everything around us. So once again, we're picking this one because we want to have that, even at a minute, that any extra little bit of damage we can get out from this build is going to be really good for us in open world content. So this doesn't change up our rotation much, if at all. All we're going to do is we're going to go down and we're going to check out how each of these talents comes into play. So we have our Blood Drinker abilities. So for example, let's cast our Blood Plague. All right, we got 109,000 damage. Now let's cast Blood Drinker. And you can see We are getting a ton of damage off of that over the 2.7 seconds. We've got our free Death and Decay from our passive. Our Death and Decay and our Blood Boil are going to be doing damage faster or more often because of rapid decomposition. If we can get our Bone Shield stacks above 5, you can see that now Death and Decay cost 40 Runic Power. We've already showed off Wraith Walk. You can see that we have some little bloodworms here. And if we look at that, our bloodworms are doing, 7,000 damage repeatedly, so that's a little bit of extra damage. And now we'll go ahead and we will build up to over 100 Runic Power here so we can show off Bone Shield. Alright, so we're not going to spend our Runic Power on our Death Strike because we want to build up to. We're at 110 now, so we cast Bone Storm. And we get these nice bones swirling around us, dealing damage. And that's basically how the build works. A lot of what we're doing here is just kind of baked into our abilities that already exist, but we do have a couple buttons we can push that output more damage, so when we do hit an elite or a rare mob that we're normally going to struggle to deal enough damage to kill in a timely manner, we can hit those buttons and kill it a little bit faster. So before we go out into the open world and check out how the build works, we're going to touch on the PvP talents that you can take if you want to toggle on war mode but still mainly focused on PvE content. So first I recommend that you take Relentless. Relentless is going to take your Honorable Medallion, make it completely passive, and give you a 20% reduction to all crowd control effects no matter what. So this is a good way to kind of set and forget the talent and just get a nice little added bonus. Next, I recommend that you take Unholy Command. This gives your Death Grip 2 charges. Now, unlike the other Death Knight specializations, the Blood Death Knight does not have the ability to take a talent that will allow you to reset your Death Grip cooldown. So this will at least give you 2 charges so you can pull an enemy in, kill them, pull another enemy in. And usually with a Blood Death Knight, what you really want to do is just get a lot of stuff grouped up all at the same time because you have a lot of survivability, and then start using your Blood Boil, your Death and Decay, and then your Heart Strike with the AoE capability to just try to kill everything all at the same time. So this will help you to pull more stuff into your AoE. Next, Last Dance reduces the cooldown of your dancing rune weapon by 50%. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The main thing we're going to be using dancing rune weapon for is it summons a rune weapon for 8 seconds that will mirror your melee attacks and bolster your defenses. This takes it from a 2-minute cooldown to a 1-minute cooldown, so once again it's another button we can hit on rare and elite mobs to help us kill them a lot faster. And then finally, Decomposing Aura. All enemies within 10 yards slowly decay, losing up to 3% of their maximum health every 2 seconds. Stacks up to 5 times. It lasts for 6 seconds, so you can get this up to dealing like 15% of an enemy's maximum health just for being around you. So once again, just another way to increase our damage and help us to kill things a lot faster. So that's the talents. That's our talent build. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this out into the open world and test it out on a couple of different types of enemies. So I will cut to that and see you there. Alright, so we're out here in Suramar City and we are going to fly down and just fight a couple of different types of enemies. So first off, we'll just show off fighting one single enemy here. We're going to grab this guy, pull him down. So we want to cast our Blood Boil, start using our Marrow Rend to generate our Bone Shield charges. And as you can see there, we killed him pretty quick. Now we don't have our Death Grip up, but this is where we can use our Death's Caress. And that will deal a little bit of damage and get that target to come over to us. We've got our free cast of Death and Decay. Alright. Still just want to generate those Bone Shield charges, and then once we've got them up, we start using our Heart Strike. Okay. We've got a Death Grip, we can use that. We can click on this guy, we can use our Death's Caress, get him to come over as well. Oh, he's a mage, so we're going to silence him. Alright, so we put out our Death and Decay. We can Heart Strike and hit multiple enemies. You can kind of see how this is going. But because we have so much survivability as a Blood Death Knight and we don't deal a whole lot of single target damage, we're going to take a look at the way you really want to play a Blood Death Knight. So we're going to fly over here. It's an area with some demons right over here. Let's see if we can find nope, not this one. Where are they at? Oh, right over here. There we go. So this is an elite demon here. So we want to take on this elite because I want to show you. We'll take this guy on first by himself. And I want to show you why we took all those talents, right? So let's pull this guy over. And you're going to see we're going to cast Blood Boil. We got our free Death and Decay. We're going to start using our Marrow Rends. Get up close to our 10 stacks. We've got Death Strike we can cast here. Start using our Heart Strikes. You can see how long this is taking, but we can hit Blood Drinker and boom. We took out a huge portion of his health in a fraction of the time it took us to deal the same amount, not using an ability like that. So we came over here to show off what you should actually be doing with the Blood Death Knight. What you should be doing is you should be running through a whole bunch of enemies. Something like this. Just try to gather up as many as you can. Like say, hey, come on. And then what you want to do here is you want to hit your Blood Boil. You want to put out your Death and Decay. You can start casting your Heart Strikes. Still make sure that you get your Marrow Rend up so you get your Bone Shield stacks. Alright. We got a free. Alright. And go over here. We can cast a Death Strike and heal up. Heal up there. Alright, so I didn't even use any defensive cooldowns. I didn't use any offensive cooldowns. All I used was the core kit of the Death Knight there. And you could see we killed a ton of enemies. And that is really how you want to play the Death Knight. And you could do that with normal mobs with nothing, or normal enemies with nothing special. So the reason we took the talents we did, like Blood Drinker and Bone Storm, is for those instances when we do run into a tough elite or a rare spawn, like we have one over here. Let's go see if we can kill this rare spawn. So yeah, like this guy. Right, so we can Blood Boil. We can go ahead and cast Blood Drinker, and look how much health is going to come off of him. Right, that did most of the damage for us, whereas our regular abilities, we probably would have stood here for quite a while trying to deal damage to him and get him to die. So that is the build. That's how I recommend that you play the Blood Death Knight in open world content. Once again, not a dungeon or raid tanking guide, but just for going out there and doing your quests if you want to do them in a tanking specialization. I hope that this guide has helped you to have the confidence to be able to get on your own Blood Death Knight, get out there, try it, and see if it's a specialization that you might want to play in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button and encourage me to keep making more videos like this. You can subscribe and hit the bell so that you're notified of when new videos come out. Either way, though, I really just hope that you have a fun time in Battle for Azeroth. Thanks for watching.